Hi everyone, my name is Stephen Stewart. It is February the 21st, and this webinar is going to be about Power Ore's Opemiska Copper Mine Complex. Specifically, I'm going to keep a very narrow focus on our most recent news releases. We've had 2 or 3, or in fact even 4 news releases, which I'm going to cover here. The nuts and bolts of them are the high-grade mineralization, the lower-grade, longer intersections mineralization, which we define as disseminated mineralization, which is absolutely critical when defining an open pit. I'm going to talk about how near surface all of these intersections are. I'm going to talk about a crown pillar, and then we're going to discuss our near-term objective, which is to put a 43-101 resource estimation, as well as economics. At the end of the day, we're looking to define an economic ore body within a pit on the Opemiska project. And once we do so, we think we're way ahead of the game because we've got access to infrastructure, rail, road, paved road, power on site, airport right at our doorstep. Those are really key fundamentals and part of the story why we like it so much. So let's get started. Everybody knows here the forward-looking statements. I'll just brush over that, but I encourage you to take your time and read through those. So again, as I talked about earlier, the focus is going to be the grade, the near surface mineralization. I'm going to explain what I mean by the disseminated material. I'm going to explain exactly what a crown pillar is, because I've had a few questions about what is a crown pillar and why that is important to the Opemiska. I'm going to again highlight our infrastructure and talk about our near-term objective, which is to define an economic ore body. So I'll start off with this. This is my favorite picture. I've shown this to a number of copper miners over the past few weeks, and it's sort of our metal money shot, if you will. It's effectively, that's pure metal. You can see the drill hole it's a historic yet compliant drill hole. It's over 17% copper, along with a 1.7 grams per ton gold over 3 meters. That is the vein type of mineralization. I want you to remember that because I'm going to talk about the vein versus disseminated in a bit, but it's very obvious when you look at that. That's metal, and when Falconbridge was mining this, that's exactly what they were after. Now the wall rock, if you will, which hosts these veins, that is also mineralized, and particularly as we go to the western part of the project. But it's really important to know this is a high-grade vein system that also uniquely has disseminated material. So these are, again, we've highlighted these in our previous news release from a few weeks ago, but I have to point out on the left-hand side there, you'll see these copper equivalent grades. They're phenomenal. Just a quick note, we do all of our copper equivalent calculations at spot price. In fact, these are spot prices before gold took off. We're probably in the 1270 gold range, and now gold's pushing 1350. So in fact, if we were to recalculate these, the numbers would go up. And copper, might I add, has just recently broken above its 200 moving day average. So these, in fact, would be underestimated based on spot. But nonetheless, any price you have, there's a lot of copper, gold, and silver in these intersections. I will point out, as you can see, you've got the 30 plus and the 20 plus, etc. Those are over somewhat narrow intervals, as one might expect, but I'm going to point out the from and the to. You can see these are extremely near surface. The 30%, we found that at 5 meters from surface. That's awfully significant. And then you scroll down into some of the lesser, and I don't know if lesser is the right way to say it, but we've got nearly 9% copper equivalent over 7.5 meters. That's pretty substantial. And again, it's starting from 31 feet and goes down to 39. I mean, that's clearly in an open pit. Most, if not all, of these results are in what's called the crown pillar. As I said, I'm going to explain exactly what that is, but I want everybody to fully appreciate that these copper grades and the corresponding intersections, I mean, 6%, the fifth or the sixth one down is 6.15% copper equivalent over 10 meters. There's another almost 5% copper, again over 10 meters. And again, I want to point out how shallow these are. So this is material that's going to go in the early days of an open pit. Why is that important? Well, payback. This is the stuff you mine quickly. Clearly, there's high grade. That increases the economics of the project. So everybody who knows the Opemiska knows it's got high grade, but these are all new to market intersections, and certainly worth pointing out. This is a somewhat new concept that we have, reinterpreted, if you will, or I don't want to say discovered, but certainly something that we're developing. These are what we call the recent high grade long intervals. I've switched around the columns to put the length of the mineralized interval up first. We've got two back-to-back 81-meter intervals, with one with over 1% copper. Again, those numbers will increase. One just under 1%. We've got 52 meters at nearly 2% copper equivalent. I'm not going to run through these, but again, these intersections absolutely warrant a lot of attention. Again, I'm going to go back and I'm going to reference the to and the from. I think these clearly demonstrate that the mineralization is very near surface. One thing you got to watch out for when you're talking about long intervals in the mining business, it's what's called smearing, and it's when you get intervals such as these. And I'm flipping back here to the high grade, and sometimes mining companies will talk about, oh, they've got a long disseminated interval, but what in fact they've done is they've taken a high grade narrow intersection and extrapolated it over a very high interval. And I can tell you, while the long intervals definitely do hit high grade veins as they go through the in situ and through the ground, the mineralization is disseminated, and that is the most important point I want to make here today. And this, we had a news release out here. It was a fairly technical news release, and this part of the reason why we're talking about it today is this we did a twinned hole, okay? So you're looking at S26, the hole that was done by Falconbridge back in the day on the left-hand side. And it was a 57.9 meter hole. And what I want to point out is they just did a single assay throughout this entire nearly 60 meter intersection. Why do they do that, you might ask? Well, again, I'll flip back. I'll reference that pure metal picture that I showed to start off the presentation. Well, the mineralization is easy to see if you're just looking for the veins, and that's what they did. They went after the easy visual stuff to mine. And I'll also note they were going. It was a different context. Copper price was different, and they were going in an underground context. And when you're mining underground, it's a completely set of economics. It's a completely different business model than an open pit. You're going after the rock surgically, because moving rock underground, mining it and moving it is so expensive underground. You have to go for the high grade stuff. So back to S26, they just did one assay. It was about 5% copper, which is pretty phenomenal. But they largely didn't pay attention to the rest. And so they had some visual estimates on some other high grade pops, but they just weren't paying attention to the non-obvious stuff. Now, what was done here, on the right-hand side, you see hole OP 2015-01. This hole was twinned, and the reason it was twinned is because we don't have the core for S26. So we've been going back and validating all the work that Falconbridge has done. We have a great deal of confidence in the integrity of the work, but as Reagan says, you trust but verify, and that's what this twin hole program was all about. And this twin hole unveiled a massive amount of data. One is that the Falconbridge data is validated. We can see the correlation because these two holes, S26 and OP 2015-01, they're 3 meters apart from each other. And the mineralization also coincidentally starts from 3 meters at surface. Again, they're very, very shallow, but you can see the high grade pop that happens at the top of the hole, where in Falconbridge and S26 you see over 5%. And the one that was done more recently, you can see it gets up to 25%, etc. And what was done in the more recent hole is that they not only did they obviously get the high grade, they sampled the entire 90-meter hole, which was right beside the original. They sampled the entire 90-meter hole on a per meter basis. So every meter was assayed and tested, and you can see very clearly that it is mineralized throughout. It's 5% copper throughout the entire 90-meter hole. So that is significant. That indicates that yes, there is high-grade veins, but the mineralization in between the high-grade veins is also potentially ore. And when you're digging an open pit, instead of moving that material into the waste pile we can put it through the mill. That's what we're trying to do in our exercise, is just reinterpret everything. Flipping through the next slide, people who have followed us have seen this before, but this is a visual interpretation of the veins that come to the surface in red there. That's a planned section. Over to the west, you can see that's going to be a big area of exploration. The further west you go, that's where we see the more disseminated material. That's very important. But what we've done here is we've plotted a lot of the holes, some of the high-grade intersections, again, where they start at surface, where they are on the grid system, and there's also some step-out holes that in particular, the 1.04 copper equivalent over 78 meters, which is of particular interest to us as well. I'm going to move on to this photograph, or this image here. We just created it, and it correlates to the news release that we just had out 2 or 3 days ago. Again, while we're trying to explain how we're approaching the disseminated mineralization, and we will look to further define it. Within the news release, we have 4 different areas of mineralization, and I'm going to highlight each of them and give a little bit of an explanation. In particular, I'm going to start with type A, and that has to do with the contact between the 2 different types of rocks. There's the rhyolites and the pyroxenites over to the east. The rhyolites were an impermeable rock type, and so when the fluids came through the mineralization from an east to west fashion, it sort of pooled along that contact. It's sort of like a pool lining or such, and so that's where we see all that disseminated mineralization. That's the A zone. That's going to be a very important part of our, call it, exploration drilling. So that's an explanation for the type A. For the type B, those are mineralization between certain veins. So you can see vein 1 and vein 2, those were, and vein 3, certainly those were the main veins that were mined by Falconbridge back in the day. Again, to go back and reference, when you are mining underground, it's a completely different strategy. Again, you're going for surgical type extraction. There are others, call it lesser veins, not quite as thick, and the original veins were very, very thick and maybe not quite as rich. But there are sort of sub-veins in between these veins that were not mined because it just wasn't economic to do so at the time. But what we see is parallel veins here. We will be picking those up in our resource calculation, and obviously conceptually in the pit. The more veins and mineralized material you have, the better. We see these mineralized veins in between the sort of the main structures, if you will. So that's the type B. That's the type of mineralization we're talking about. The type C is a little bit different. It's the easterly or the westerly extensions of the known veins, the main veins there, and we highlighted on vein 2 and vein number 13. Again, as these veins start to shrink, it is likely, and we see this in our model, that Falconbridge left this mineralization behind because, again, it just wasn't economic during the time. Keep in mind, they were mining. I mean, while the average grade throughout the 40 years of this mine was 2.5%, it certainly wasn't unusual for them to be mining 5 and 6% in particular years. So, and the point is, the cutoff grades with 50, 60, 70 cent copper are extremely different than they are today. Not only is the cutoff grade for underground mining different, again, the strategy of underground versus open pit are completely different. The last type is the D type. This is the unidentified narrower veins that come right to surface. We think there's a couple that are sort of major that were found by Exin, the vendor of this property. We've talked about some of these veins in our previous news releases. A lot of it's going to be coming up in our 43-101 report, which is due out very, very soon. And we're going to be discussing the mineralization that we see right at surface. We know it wasn't mined because there's no stopes in any of the plans and sections that we've since digitized. So again, D zone is a little bit different style. But again, all of this mineralization is disseminated and will go into ultimately our open pit. Okay, so moving on. I want to talk a little bit about what a crown pillar is, and while it may be second nature to those who are mining engineers, for a lot of people they don't know what it is. And effectively, what a crown pillar is, it's the surface level that remains untouched. And the reason you leave this thickness of rock at the surface is because you don't want your sublevels to cave in. So it's basically just the ceiling of your mine. And why is that particularly important at the Opemiska? Well, first things first, as we've shown, the mineralization runs right to surface. Okay, so there's mineralization in that crown pillar. Second point is it's virgin rock. It's never been mined. Falconbridge was unable to mine it because they needed to keep the integrity of the sublevels. So we know that mineralization's still there. It's been drilled, and those are all the intersections we've listed earlier. And it's extremely high grade, you know, exceptional grade. So those are some of the grades, the super high grades that Falconbridge was mining in the vein and the underground system. This is what we're going to pick up in the open pit. Why is that important? Well, when you're running your economics and when you're building your mine, this is the material that gets mined first. This is the material that gets paid back to capital first. So, you know, you want the high grade stuff to be paid back first. And fortunately enough, because of the nature of this mineralization and its near surface, this is a real big bonus. And the other thing I'll point out, it's between 30 and 60 meters, depending on where you are, and so a couple variables. But the point is this crown pillar is quite thick. And so that means there's an awful lot of mineralization there that we can pick up. So effectively, that's what a crown pillar is. And why is it important? Because it's high-grade mineralization, which aids to our payback in a quick fashion. Going to quickly reference our RPA reports. We're in the process, and they speak for themselves in terms of the size of these deposits. We think there's the opportunity to expand upon this. As I noted, we are in the process of completing our 43-101 resource report. This is the maiden resource report. This won't, the one coming out in a matter of weeks will not be a resource estimate. That is coming out in a few months after. But this report is going to be a very good reading. It's going to go into extreme detail about everything that I'm talking about. It will reference these RPA reports and talk about how we think they're certainly valid and how we're going to grow on them. But the short story here is if we can achieve grades and tons and the proximity and hopefully even exceed these, we will be overnight a very I don't want to say bankable is not the right word, but certainly a major player in the copper space in Quebec. To sort of close out here, I'll just point out our comparables. And what we've done here is we've listed our best intersections. And I think, you know, I've probably been repetitive on our intersections, but I think it's for good reason because they just require attention, and they're right in the middle of Quebec. Oftentimes people say you have to go to the AK-47 nations to see copper intersections like that, but not here in the Opemiska. It's a rare situation. So what we've done here is we really can't find too many comparables in terms of grade, infrastructure, obviously jurisdiction in Quebec, and then intersections. It all comes down to the drill holes. So what we did is we pulled our best drill holes. We looked at some of the competitors' best drill holes, and then we said, well, do they have the infrastructure that we have? And you know, some people have it, but nobody has, you know, all four things checked together with, you know, intersections, which I'll hold up against anybody, especially given how close to surface they are. And then of course you look at our market cap, and so that's, to me, speaks to the value and the opportunity within Power Ore. It's early days. The market hasn't fully understood what we have and what our plans are, but I think we're doing our best to get the story out, explain that you know, this project isn't too good to be true. This project is a reality, and especially as copper continues to catch its bid, I think this is going to be a really exciting story for 2019 and beyond. So I will wrap it up there. I will finish with my contacts, and I'll quickly note I'm available to anybody who wants to talk. If you want a instant electronic email response with all of our materials, presentations, news releases, and my contacts, just send an email to info@powerore.com and you'll automatically receive that information. Otherwise, my contacts are there. Again, my name is Stephen Stewart, and thank you for listening to the Power Ore story on the Opemiska Copper Mine.